Welcome back to Northwest Ohio. It's springtime on the Chicago line in 2020, and with the world struggling from the COVID-19 pandemic, freight traffic was down to record lows. However, Norfolk Southern was still moving the freight, and we were trackside to capture history in motion once again. On April 2nd, we set up for an evening of rail fanning from the Bryan, Ohio Amtrak station platform. Westbound 15Q is a daily Bellevue, Ohio to Elkhart, Indiana manifest train that works Blair Yard in Fostoria and Mega Yard in Toledo before continuing west. It has become a mainstay on the Chicago line, even among the seemingly endless changes involved with precision scheduled railroading on Norfolk Southern. Throughout this video, we captured the 15Q at various locations along the Chicago line in Northwest Ohio and Northeast Indiana. Intermodal 20K is a daily eastbound Chicago, Illinois to Croxton, New Jersey train. Note the abundance of bare tables on today's train. About 30 minutes later, eastbound intermodal train 20T would make an appearance with a first for delay in block on the Chicago line, a mid-train DPU. Though the Midwest isn't exactly known for steep grades, 20T has been running with mid-train distributed power units since the fall of 2019, according to local rail fans who are more familiar with traffic patterns on the Chicago line. Due to PSR, Norfolk Southern has been experimenting with more and more mid-train power on many different subdivisions, including the Dearborn. The justification for this change is fuel savings. In theory, distributed power allows for better fuel savings on longer trains. 21Q would be our first westbound intermodal train during the visit. The daily E-Rail New Jersey to Chicago, Illinois train was making track speed as it continued towards the Windy City on this pleasant spring evening. Thoroughbred -9 number 9719 led train 26N east by our location as the sun continued to sink below the horizon. This would be the last train we captured on the 2nd of April before returning the following afternoon. On April 3rd, 2020, Delay in Block revisited Defiance, Ohio, with hopes of capturing the Napoleon, Defiance, and Western Railway's former Santa Fe GP20Us in action. Over the years, Pioneer Rail Corporation has acquired a small fleet of former Santa Fe GP20Us and recently assigned several to the ND and W. Defiance Yard has seen many upgrades within the last year, including new track, ties, and ballast. These upgrades will allow Pioneer to better serve their customers with safer, faster, and more reliable switching along the former Wabash line. Still in Santa Fe blue and yellow, Pioneer utilizes the 3001 and 2026 on the ND and W. This morning, the 2026, still wearing its BNSF number from when it was first purchased, was switching out the Johns Manville Defiance Plant 2. Plant 2 is located directly east of St. John's Catholic Church on Jackson Avenue. A Berkshire Hathaway company, Johns Manville manufactures premium quality insulation, commercial roofing and fibers, and non-wovens for commercial, industrial, and residential applications. The rails of the Napoleon Defiance and Western were originally built in 1855 by the Toledo and Illinois Railroad, 5 years before the Civil War began. The route follows the Maumee River between New Haven, Indiana and Maumee, Ohio, and was built to connect the growing cities of Fort Wayne, Indiana and Toledo. Known as the 5th District, the railroad was built over the former Great Black Swamp. The railroad would eventually come under ownership of the Wabash Railroad system in the late 1870s, after being consolidated through a series of Midwest Railroad mergers. The Wabash would operate this line until 1964, when they were taken over by the Norfolk and Western Railway. Passenger service would end 5 years prior to the takeover in 1959. Under the N&W, the 5th District became a secondary branch and maintenance was deferred. Combined with the fact that the line was built with lightweight rail over a former swampland, the roadbed began to sink into the ground, causing trains to lean toward the west. In 1982, N&W became part of Norfolk Southern, who would operate the line for only a few short years. Due to declining traffic, NS abandoned a segment of the branch line from Maumee to Liberty Center. In 1990, the line was sold to the Indiana High Rail Corporation for operation between Liberty Center and Woodburn. Indiana High Rail operated the line for several years with Alco locomotives until the company was liquidated in 1997. By this time, the once prosperous line seemed to be facing a possible abandonment. However, the Maumee and Western Railroad, with help from the state of Ohio's Rail Development Commission, purchased the line between Woodburn and Liberty Center, with their headquarters being located in Defiance, Ohio. The Maumee and Western operated a daily train between Defiance and Napoleon, except for on the weekends. At the time, the cost to repair the line was estimated to be in the millions, and way too costly for the MAW to maintain. Despite the poor conditions, the short line had made some minor improvements with ballast and tamping. But without the sufficient funds they needed to continue, the line still deteriorated further, forcing the MAW to sell off their remaining assets to Pioneer Rail. After taking ownership in 2013, Pioneer has greatly improved the quality of track, bridges, and other infrastructure. In addition to upgrading the yard at Defiance, the ND&W has replaced hundreds of ties, spikes, and joints along the right-of-way between Liberty Center and Woodburn, Indiana. It might not appear to be all that improved from our last visit, but Pioneer is making great strides in rehabilitating this line after over 50 years of neglect by predecessor railroads. At FC Junction, ND&W interchanges with CSX Transportation. Here, 2026 is seen spotting cars for CSX.
Like they crossed over.
Once 2026 had returned from the interchange light, we captured the approaching CSX westbound intermodal train Q191 with 2 Union Pacific EMDs on the point. With the ND and W shutting down for the day, we decided to spend the rest of the afternoon and evening on Norfolk Southern in Bryan. Our first train on the Chicago line was eastbound Intermodal 294 with 2 -9s on the point. Conveniently located off US 127, Bryan is a railfan favorite for watching trains at high speeds along one of the straightest mainline railroads in the United States. An hour later, we captured the short westbound intermodal train 25N. Following closely behind 25N was westbound manifest train 15Q, which was powered by a GE and EMD 6-axle combo. We captured the train around 4 p.m., and it would be our last train of the day, as April 3rd would prove to be a very slow day for the railroad amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. During this time, the Chicago line saw an incredible decline in traffic, with the elimination of many manifest and intermodal trains, along with all dedicated auto rack trains due to the Detroit automakers shutting down the assembly lines to produce medical ventilators. System-wide in the month of April, NS saw a traffic decrease of a reported 150 trains due to the pandemic. After 15Q cleared Bryan, we would not see another train until sundown.
Caca.
On April 5th, we would return to Bryan again for another evening of freight trains. '26N would be our first train of the day as it charged eastward at track speed. About 20 minutes later, we caught train 15Q again, with 3 Tier 3 GEVOs, a Tier 4, and a Dash 9 in charge of the train. Our last train of the day on the 3rd, 20W would be the next eastbound intermodal train. 20W, which is handed off by the BNSF Railway, is a Friday through Monday Chicago, Illinois to Croxton, New Jersey train that works Rutherford, Pennsylvania. We would return to the Chicago line several days later on April 9th. Waterloo, Indiana is another exciting location along the Chicago line to capture fast freight trains. On April 9th, the weather would be less than favorable for recording video as the winds exceeded 40 miles per hour throughout most of the day. With a Tier 4 GEVO leading and a Dash 9 trailing, 25N, the daily Columbus, Ohio to Corwith, Illinois intermodal train, would be our first of the afternoon. 25N works Toledo, Ohio and Hammond, Indiana before continuing to Chicago for interchange with BNSF Railway. Waterloo was once a very popular railfan location due to the presence of the New York Central-style signal bridge that once crossed over both mains at CP 367. The signal bridge was replaced in May of 2018, and since then, fewer and fewer railfans choose to watch trains in Waterloo. About 20 minutes later, eastbound train 68N would appear in the distance. The as-needed FRAC sand train, which was handed over by Canadian National Railway in Chicago, is bound for the final destination of Sayre, Pennsylvania. Two SD70 ACCs, 1847 and 1843, along with a Dash 9, are in charge of today's train. Led by SD70 ACC number 1807, westbound intermodal train 23K, bound for Chicago's 47th Street Yard, would meet 68N at Waterloo's Amtrak station. 30 minutes later, Chicago Line local train B43, which originates in and terminates at Bryan, Ohio, was seen on its return trip east at speed. The winds were terrible at this time of day, which made conditions especially difficult for shooting video, even on a tripod. The weather was certainly not cooperating. The local will work the Bungie grain elevator east of town before continuing to Bryan, where the crew will then tie the train down for the day. 2 GEs, a Dash 9 and a Tier 4, were in charge of the westbound 21Q as it charged through Waterloo on its way to Elkhart, Indiana, where the train will receive a fresh crew. "30 minutes later, empty westbound ethanol train 65K continued towards Elkhart, Indiana, with a Dash 9 and an SD70 ACE in charge of the as-needed train. "65K would be our last train at Waterloo before catching Canadian Pacific train 241 outside of Butler, Indiana. Canadian Pacific utilizes the Norfolk Southern Chicago line and the former Wabash main line between Butler and Detroit for through traffic between Toronto, Ontario and Chicago, Illinois. after capturing Manifest 241, we received word that a heritage unit was in the vicinity on train 15Q. We would venture further east back into Ohio to capture 15Q at Stryker. As the historical marker notes, Stryker was once home to William J. Knight, a captor of the Confederate locomotive the General during the Civil War. Or, if you're from the South, the War of Northern Aggression. Leading 15Q west in perfect light was none other than the Pennsylvania Railroad Heritage Unit ES44AC number 8102. Upon capturing the daily 15Q on the Chicago line, we would end our day in northwest Ohio along the former Wabash Railroad mainline at Kunkel, Ohio, where the daily Detroit to Decatur, Illinois Manifest Train 121 was making its way west. Because of Norfolk Southern's PSR fuel-saving restrictions, 121 was prohibited from having more than one locomotive online. Because of this, SD70 ACE number 1005 was seriously struggling to keep track speed. Nonetheless, 121's slow pace didn't hold up any rail traffic on the line, as the former Wabash had very little automotive traffic at the time of our visit due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Springtime on the Chicago line in 2020 certainly was different from years past, but nonetheless, we were grateful to have returned to one of our favorite regions of the Norfolk Southern system.